Good. So in this second session, we'll be looking at what sorts of faults can arise in this practice and how do we overcome them. But first, we're going to do a meditation, another mindfulness of breathing meditation. And this time, instead of simply observing sensations throughout the body, which is good for relaxation, we're going to notice the rhythm of our breath. And I'll explain that a little bit more shortly. And that's also very good for relaxation. Then we'll do a short review of a few of the points from the last session. And then we'll move on to look at what tools do we use in this practice. And then we're going to look at what sorts of faults can arise in this practice and how do we overcome them. And in particular, the two main faults that we succumb to is laxity and excitation, or in other words, dullness and distraction. And we'll look at those in more detail and how to really work with overcoming them. And then we'll do another mindfulness of breathing meditation, but this time we're going to focus on the abdomen, and then time for Q&A at the end of the session. But first, the meditation, the rhythm of the breath. So what we're focusing on here is simply the rhythm of the breath, just noticing if our breathing is very long or short, if it's deep or shallow, if it's slow or fast. But remember here, we're not trying to do anything with the breath. We're not trying to make it rhythmic or shallow or whatever. We're just noticing how is my breathing going on at the moment? Just noticing that. And again, that's very diffuse, meaning it's very good for relaxation. And again, with this practice, like the last one, really emphasizing just the relaxation, just on every out breath, releasing any tension, releasing any thoughts. The main emphasis here is relaxation. So let's do that practice now. So find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. We begin by preparing the body, setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And so whilst keeping the back nice and straight, simply allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Relaxing and releasing any tightness or tension on each out breath. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. and allowing the mind to come to rest. To come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. And with each out breath, releasing any thoughts that may have arisen. Releasing them into space. And then whilst maintaining that relaxed body and relaxed mind, we can begin to notice the rhythm of our breath. Noticing if it's long or short, deep or shallow, slow or fast. So simply noticing the rhythm of the breath. Without trying to manipulate or control the breath in any way. Simply noticing the breath, the rhythm. Noticing if there's any changes in the rhythm over time. And again, here the emphasis is on relaxation. Maintaining that relaxed body and relaxed mind. And again, if you notice you've got distracted from the breath, First thing to do is relax. Then release the distraction and very gently return to noticing the rhythm of the breath without clamping down more forcefully. Simply keep coming back again and again, patiently and happily. And if you find yourself sinking into laxity or dullness, perhaps because you've lost interest in the practice, then refresh your attention. Refresh your interest in the practice. Restore your attention, and then retain an ongoing flow of mindfulness. So refresh, restore, and retain. Simply noticing the rhythm of the breath. We can bring the meditation to a close. Just a short review of some of the points from last session. And so today we're looking at what's called the Shamatha practice. Shamatha is a Sanskrit term. Shama means calm. Ta means to remain or abide. So we're talking about a calm, clear, and focused mind. So Shamatha practice is a practice of cultivating a calm, clear, and focused mind, developing our attention skills. And we saw there was a lot of benefits for this practice, because with this practice, we'll become more focused and effective in everything we do in our life. We'll find we'll have much less stress, agitation, tension, anxiety, a more sense of inner peace and well-being. We'll be able to become the masters of our mind instead of being the slaves of our mind. We'll start to enjoy really the simple pleasures in life much more than we do now. And it's also, this practice is the basis of all other meditation practices. And we saw there that there are essentially two qualities we're cultivating in this practice: stability and clarity. Stable mind, being able to focus without becoming distracted, but also a clear mind, being able to focus very clearly on the object without falling into dullness. But I added that third quality of relaxation that you normally won't see in the meditation text, and it's something we really need to pay attention to, particularly for us in the modern world. That if we really want to develop a stable and clear mind, we first need to learn how to relax. So relax, relax, relax. I can't really overemphasize this point enough, based on my experience and many people I see in the modern world. That's the first thing. And the analogy here with the from Alan Wallace, the tree. First, we really need to sink those deep roots of relaxation to support the trunk of stability and the branches and leaves of clarity. Otherwise, it'll just keep falling over. So really emphasize relaxation initially. And in terms of objects, we saw there's many possibilities. Three that Alan Wallace recommends in his book: the breath, the mind, and awareness. And I think each one of those three has enormous benefits for us in the modern world. And for many of us, I think at least initially, the best place to start is the breath. And we saw the reasons why in the last session. But then also, once we've established a basis, we've got a more relaxed, stable, and clear mind, then we can move on to later observing the mind, observing our thoughts and emotions, to really become the masters of our mind and not the slaves of our mind. So we can be able to not get overwhelmed and tormented by our thoughts, emotions, memories. And then at a more subtle level, we can simply rest in awareness. That this can really also be very beneficial for us in the modern world, to rest in that open, spacious stillness, rather than now our mind tends to be very tight, constricted, and reacts to stimulus, pleasant and unpleasant. Instead of that reactionary, tight, tense mind, we can be in the open, spacious stillness. And then we can be much more effective in dealing even with difficult situations in our life, rather than reacting. So resting in awareness, very, very useful. Next topic now is, what tools do we use in this practice? And here we can talk about two tools using this analogy of the elephant. So here we quote a great 6th century Indian master called Baba Viveka. And he says, the out of control elephant of the mind is to be bound to the firm post of the observed object using the rope of mindfulness, and gradually brought under control by the hook of introspection. So we have two tools we use here: mindfulness and introspection. So the analogy is, our mind is like a wild elephant, rampaging everywhere, destroying things in its path. So what we are to do is to tie that elephant of our mind with a rope of mindfulness to the object. So mindfulness is like the rope that we are holding, tying to the object. But then we need quality control to notice, are we still holding the object or not? And that's the job of introspection, is quality control. So we can see this in this picture here that we're going to look at more detail next session when we look at the stages of progress. The elephant is the mind. You can see the elephant here initially running wildly ahead of the meditator. Our mind is completely out of control. And the meditator is trying to then control that with a rope of mindfulness to hold the object, and the hook of introspection to monitor that. Just briefly, a little bit more information on those two tools. Mindfulness is what is being translated from the original Sanskrit term smrti, or the Pali term sati. And both of those terms literally mean to remember the object, to hold the object, to not forget it. So that mindfulness here in the Buddhist context is defined as the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. And we see this in a quote from, again, the great Indian master Asanga from the 4th century, who says, "What is mindfulness? The non-forgetfulness of the mind with respect to a familiar object having the function of non-distraction." What we need to remember is that the word mindfulness is used a lot now. There's a lot of modern day mindfulness movements. But what we need to remember is that often how the word mindfulness now is used in a lot of modern traditions is not the same way as it was defined in the original Buddhist context. In fact, what we find now in a lot of modern day mindfulness traditions, they often define mindfulness as something like a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. Very good thing to do, but this is not really how the word mindfulness was originally used in Buddhism. So we need to be aware of that distinction, how the word mindfulness, the way it's defined now in modern traditions is not the same. Otherwise, we get confused. So remember here, mindfulness literally means to remember, to be able to hold the object, to not forget it. But then we need a second tool, introspection, in Sanskrit, samprajanya. And this is really quality control. So mindfulness is holding the object, and then introspection is monitoring that mindfulness, meaning how are we going? Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to get agitated or dull? So here, the definition of introspection is the mental faculty having the function of monitoring the state of one's body and mind. With this faculty, we note when the mind has succumbed to either laxity or excitation. And we see this from Shantideva, another great Indian master from the 8th century, who says, in brief, this alone is the definition of introspection, the repeated examination of the state of one's body and mind. So particularly here, noting the body, because introspection is checking the body. Are we falling in a heap? We got our back straight? Are we relaxed? But particularly here, monitoring the mind. Are we still holding the object, or are we starting to get distracted, or are we sinking into dullness? So that's introspection's job, quality control. So then actually we can talk about 5 faults in this practice. And we see a quote here from a great 16th century Tibetan master, Panchen Losang Chigi Gelsen, who says, Shamatha, and shamatha is a particular level of concentration we're striving for, is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon the 5 faults. So we see this diagram here, the windy road diagram, depicting the 9 stages we go through, and we'll be looking at those briefly in the next session after lunch. So here he says we have 8 antidotes to abandon 5 faults. So let's have a look at those. The first fault is laziness. Like everything in our life, if we see no benefit in a certain activity, then we're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing that activity. We're not going to do it because we don't see any benefit. Why should I do that? It takes effort. I don't see any benefit. I'm not going to do that. So similarly here, if we don't appreciate the benefits of shamatha practice, we're not going to do it. We're going to be lazy. We go, well, why am I doing this practice? It's not so easy and I can't see much benefits. I'm not going to do it. So that's the first fault we need to overcome. There are 4 antidotes here. The first is faith. So like everything in our life, if we examine a certain activity and we can see that that activity is going to bring us a lot of benefit if we do it, then we're going to have faith in that activity. We're going to want to do it. So that's the first antidote. By reflecting on the benefits of the shamatha practice, we're going to have faith that this practice really will benefit us. The more faith we have in the practice, the more aspiration, the more we'll want to do the practice. And the more aspiration we have in the practice, the more enthusiasm and effort we'll put into the practice. The more effort we put into the practice, the more we'll gain the 4th antidote called pliancy. Pliancy means flexibility, serviceability of body and mind. Now our body and mind are not very pliant or flexible. We have a lot of aches and pains in the body, and we have a lot of resistance in our mind to the practice. But as we get deeper into the practice, our mind and body will become more flexible and serviceable. And so we'll talk more about this idea of pliancy in the third session. So that's the 4 antidotes to overcome laziness. Once we've overcome laziness and we're going into the practice, then the first fault is forgetfulness. Either we forget the instructions, forget what to do, or we simply forget the object. Then, of course, the antidote is mindfulness, to be mindful of the instructions, what to do, and to be mindful to remember the object. That's the first one. Then the third fault is this classic pair of laxity and excitation, these two main imbalances in the practice. Laxity means sinking, the mind getting very dull, excitation getting agitated and distracted. And the antidote to that is introspection. So remember, introspection's job is to monitor. Am I falling into laxity and dullness or agitation, excitation, distraction? That's the antidote. But then the fourth fault is called non-application. That is, we're monitoring our mindfulness. We've noticed we're either sinking into dullness or falling into agitation, distraction, and we don't do anything about that. That's a fault. So the antidote to that is application. And generally application here means if we're sinking into dullness or we're becoming distracted, simply reapply mindfulness. Hold the object again. That's the antidote. That's application. But then there's a fifth fault called over-application, which is not really a problem for us as beginners, but it could become a problem the higher we go in this practice. And over-application means that we're actually holding the object well, but we're unnecessarily adjusting our focus. We keep fixing, we keep adjusting when we don't need to. So the saying here is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Leave it as it is. That's what equanimity means here. Equanimity means the mind is already balanced. Just leave it there. Don't try and do anything with it because it's actually good. If we try and do something, that's a fault at that point. And here from Tsongkhapa, he says about the first one, if you cannot stop the laziness of being disinclined to cultivate concentration and of enjoying things that are not conducive to it, from the outset, you will not gain entry into concentration. And I think for many of us in the modern world, this is probably the main reason we're very lazy when it comes to do this practice, because we're still looking out there for the source of our happiness. And we're still looking out there for the source of our suffering. So we're putting all of our attention out there and we're not bringing our attention inside to this practice. And we sit down to meditate, focusing on the breath, and we think, oh, this is just so boring. Why am I doing this? Is just so boring. I'd rather go have these pleasurable experiences out there. So as long as we have that attitude, we're not, as Tsongkhapa says, we're not going to gain entry into concentration. So really, to help overcome that laziness, not only those antidotes, particularly of faith in the practice, but to really shift our worldview. Because as long as our worldview is the source of my happiness is out there, I can guarantee you're going to be very lazy when it comes to doing this and all meditation practices, because we're too busy chasing after that stuff. We don't have time to work on insight. So and this is part of what's called the preliminary practices. One of the big preliminary practices is to shift our worldview, to come to realize the source of my happiness and suffering is not anywhere out there. It lies within our own mind. And if we can shift that, then we can understand that this practice is the gateway to genuine happiness and inner well-being. And if we can really appreciate that, we're not going to be very lazy at all. We're going to put a lot of time and energy into developing ourselves rather than chasing all those sensory pleasures out there. Let's have a look at these two imbalances in more detail now, laxity and excitation. First, let's have a look at laxity, a sinking, dullness. And so here in this diagram, it says the elephant. So the elephant is our mind, and the black color is symbolizing laxity. So what is laxity? So here Tsongkhapa defines laxity. He says, laxity means that your mind's way of apprehending the object of meditation is slack. it does not apprehend the object with much vividness or firmness, meaning our mind is sinking, it's becoming dull. And we have 3 levels of laxity that we can identify here. The first one is coarse laxity, means heavy sinking. And here it says that's defined as the attention mostly disengages from the object due to insufficient vividness or clarity. So we're sitting there, we're focusing on the breath, our mind is sinking so much that we completely disconnect from the object and we're just in this completely dull state. Extreme laxity would be when we fall asleep in meditation. That would be the sort of the bottom, that would be the heaviest sort of laxity, actually falling asleep. But before that, we're just sort of sitting in this dazed, hazy, dull state where nothing's registering. That's coarse laxity. Medium laxity is when we're still focusing on an object, we can still notice the sensations of the breath, for example, but there's no clarity or vividness. There's something there. We can sort of notice vaguely some sort of sensations, but they're not very clear. And then subtle laxity is when the object appears vividly, but the attention is slightly slack. That is where, for example, focusing on the breath, sensations are there. We notice them quite clearly, but still the attention is a little bit slack. This is not something we will be able to pick up now. We have much heavier laxity to worry about. But as we progress and we get to the higher stages, we'll start to notice this. We need just to increase the attention slightly. But now we're dealing mainly with pretty coarse and even medium laxity. That's what we're improving. How to overcome this laxity? So we can have a 3-level strategy for laxity. So the first level of strategy, if we notice our mind is sinking, Tsongkhapa says what we do is tighten up your apprehension of the object and continue meditating. So tighten up means here, sharpen your focus on the object. It doesn't mean tense the mind. So tighten doesn't mean tense. It means we're too loose and we need to sharpen the focus. Just sharpen the focus to uplift the mind a bit. So let's say we're doing that, but we're continually sinking. And so this doesn't seem to work very effectively. Then we go to the second line strategy, because what is happening is if our mind is just constantly sinking, we sharpen sinking all the time, it's probably because we've lost interest in the practice. We're not enthusiastic, and that's why we're sinking. So second line strategy, Shantideva says, if that's the case, then he says, inspire yourself by cultivating delight, meaning uplift the mind by cultivating delight in this practice, that this practice have a lot of enthusiasm for the practice. And so here, Tsongkhapa, he says this, he says, here is the most important remedy for stopping laxity, because the main reason we're sinking the mind is we've just lost interest in the practice. He says, when you reflect on the benefits of bodhicitta, and so bodhicitta, of course, is this aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others, that really uplifts the mind. And the great significance of attaining leisure, meaning reflecting on the fact that we've got a precious human life and let's not waste it. If you reflect on these 2 things, it will really uplift the mind. It said it should have a bracing effect on your mind. This depends on your having had experience with discerning analytical meditation on these beneficial topics. Means if we haven't really reflected on bodhicitta and precious human life before, if we simply bring to mind, oh, I've got a precious human life, it probably won't have any effect at all. But if we've reflected on that a number of times and really experientially understand the preciousness of our life and how this practice can really make our life meaningful, if we've done that before, then we bring to mind precious human life, that will really uplift the mind. Then we won't sink. So that's what Shantideva is saying, inspire yourself by cultivating delight. But let's say you're doing that and still you're just sinking. Then the third backup strategy, here Tsongkhapa says, because there's no point then continuing to meditate because we're just stuck in dullness. And we're actually developing a bad habit of just sitting in dullness all the time. So don't do that. So if you can't uplift the mind, inspire yourself, and it's just sinking all the time, then Tsongkhapa says, suspend your cultivation of concentration. Stop your meditation. clear away laxity, and then resume your meditation. So he's saying, stop the meditation, get up, do something, get over it, and then come back to meditate. And he said, in this regard, a Sangha suggests such activities as going for a walk and washing your face with water. So, invigorate the body a little bit. So that's the backup strategy. So we don't want to, every time we have dullness, stop the meditation. We want to do the first strategy, sharpen the focus. If that's not really working, then inspire yourself. If that's not working, then eventually we need to stop the meditation and overcome laxity. And one of the big things in the modern world, I'll talk about that shortly, is one of the also main reasons in the modern world we're sinking, we simply don't get enough sleep. We're just cutting corners on our sleep. So if you're not getting enough sleep and you try and meditate in the morning, I'm pretty certain you're just going to fall into dullness. So how to clear that up? Make sure you get enough sleep. Okay, so that's laxity. Let's have a look at the opposite imbalance, excitation. So excitation, we see here, the description in the diagram says, the monkey is the proliferation of thoughts. So monkey is just discursive thoughts. We talk about the crazy monkey mind jumping all over the place. And that the black color symbolizes excitation. So excitation is not just thinking, but it's actually, excitation is the mind gets agitated by the so-called sense pleasures. And we see this here from Tsongkhapa, who says, what is excitation? It is an unquiet state of mind considered a derivative of attachment, which pursues pleasant objects and acts as an impediment to shamatha. So rather than saying distraction here, we see the word excitation to highlight the fact the most common reason we get distracted is we get caught up in the so-called sense pleasures. This is so boring. I want something more pleasurable. We're chasing after those. That's excitation. So like laxity, we have 3 levels of excitation. Coarse excitation here says the attention completely disengages from the meditation object. So coarse excitation is distraction, complete distraction. We just completely lose the object. We're off on some story somewhere. A medium level of excitation, it says, involuntary thoughts occupy the center of attention while the meditative object is displaced to the periphery. So what that means is, let's say you're focusing on the breath, and maybe you've experienced this many times. You're focusing on the breath, but then you're thinking about all the pleasurable things you're going to do later in the day. In fact, that's your main focus. You're really focusing on all these other things I've got to do later today, but a little bit in the corner of the mind, you're still noticing the breath a little bit. That's medium excitation. Subtle excitation is the opposite. It says the meditative object remains at the center of attention, but involuntary thoughts emerge at the periphery of attention. So that would be, for example, you're focusing on the breath and you're mainly focused on the breath, but there's a little bit of background static. There's a few thoughts and emotions there in the background, but they're not pulling your attention fully towards them. But you sort of notice them a little bit, but you're mainly on the object. That's subtle excitation. So how to overcome excitation? So again, like laxity, we have 3 remedies. The first line strategy, again from Tsongkhapa, says, draw in the scattered attention and fix your attention upon the object of meditation. So if you notice excitation, agitation, distraction, just bring the mind in again onto the object and hold the object. So let's keep coming back to the object. But let's say we're doing that, but soon as we do that, we're distracted again, distracted all the time. Every time we bring it back, immediately gone. So again, it's probably because we've lost interest in the meditation. We're more focusing on those sense pleasures because that's more interesting to focus on. So we're caught up in all that. So then the second line strategy, if that just holding the attention again and again is not really working, Shantideva says, calm it by bringing impermanence to mind. Meaning those things that we're constantly getting distracted to, these sensory pleasures, are impermanent. The changing moment by moment. They will never bring us any stable, lasting happiness. And so by bringing impermanence to mind with respect to this, we're going to lose interest in them because they're just fleeting. They're not anything. They're not going to give us anything. Then that will bring the mind down. because the mind is really agitated here. I've got to chase after all these things. That will bring the mind down. Then we can go back to the object. But let's say we did that, we did all that, and it's still not working. We're just completely distracted all the time. Then, like dullness, laxity, no point in continuing your meditation then. If you've tried all these remedies and nothing's working, then there's no point just sitting there being completely distracted, because you're just building up the habit of distraction. So then again, Tsongkhapa says, it is crucial that you relax the meditation for a while, stop the meditation, and cultivate a sense of disenchantment. Disenchantment means to then stop the meditation and then to reflect on the fact that all these sensory pleasures are never going to bring you any lasting, genuine happiness. To become disenchanted with chasing things out there. That will bring the mind inwards. Then it says, he said to do that, rather than attempting to pull in your mind and direct it back to the object of meditation every time it becomes scattered. Because again, if we just sit there and we're just constantly distracted, we're just increasing the very habit we're trying to decrease. So again, 3 strategies. But again, this doesn't mean that every time you become distracted, stop the meditation and do something else and come back. No. First line, you get distracted, come back. Keep coming back, keep coming back. If you keep getting distracted all the time, go to the second strategy. That is, calm the mind by bringing impermanence to the mind. Bring the mind down, because the mind is really agitated. Do that. If that's not working, then we need to really stop the meditation and then really cultivate this sense of disenchantment. So again, this is preliminary practices to reflect on precious human life, death and impermanence, to reflect on that none of these things out there are going to give us any genuine happiness. If we really reflect on those, then we can have a worldview. The source of happiness is not out there, it's in here. And this is the key, the gateway to that genuine happiness. Then we can really start to meditate well. So here we have these little phrases, which I think I brought up in the meditation briefly. And that for excitation, first thing, relax, then release the distraction and return to the object. If you're falling into dullness, probably because you've lost interest, first refresh your interest in the practice, restore your attention on the object, and then retain that ongoing flow of mindfulness. So now we'll go to the meditation, and now we're going to move to focusing on the abdomen. And the abdomen is very good for improving stability of attention because it's quite easy to focus on. And we're bringing the attention down, so it's also good for relaxation. And so here what we're focusing on is the rising and lowering of the abdomen as we breathe. We're not imagining the breath coming in, going down, coming up and going out. We're not doing that. Just focusing on the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen. And here what we'll do in this meditation is we'll bring in a little bit of a tool to help us, because often we get distracted a lot in thoughts. And that is what's called counting the breath. It's not part of the standard practice, but if you find yourself getting distracted a lot, a little bit of counting the breath can be helpful, because if we're occupying the mind with counting the breath, there's less space to get caught up in thoughts and emotions. And we'll do that a little bit partway through the meditation. And what we'll do is, the way we'll count, there are many ways to count. The way we'll do it here is at the end of the in-breath, you count 1. Then you focus on the sensations during the following out-breath, the following in-breath. At the end of the next in-breath, you mentally count 2. And we'll count from 1 up to 10 and then go back to 1. If you lose count at any time, you just go back to 1. So we'll bring that in and to see if counting is helpful. Some people find counting the breath helpful. Other people find it simply annoying and another distraction. So we'll experiment. We'll see if it works for you. So let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. Setting the body into a state of relaxation. stillness, and vigilance. And remember, a vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And at the same time, allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Relaxing and releasing any tightness or tension on each out-breath. And having established a good posture, then keeping the body as still as possible, avoiding any unnecessary movement or fidgeting with the body. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest. Not doing anything at all. Simply being present. Resting in the present moment. Resting in that open, spacious stillness of the present moment. And whilst continuing to rest in that open, spacious stillness, start to become aware of the sensations of the breath in the area of the abdomen. Noticing the sensations of the rising and lowering of the abdomen as you breathe. Let's now introduce some counting of the breath to see if it helps to stabilize our attention. And so again, at the end of the in-breath, mentally note 1. And then focus on the sensations of the breath on the following out-breath and the following in-breath, and then mentally note 2. In this way, we can count from 1 up to 10 and go back to 1 again. If you lose count at any time, simply go back to 1. So let's now see if counting the breath helps to stabilize our attention. And we can bring the meditation to a close. Just one more slide here about laxity and excitation, then we'll have a bit of Q&A. As we see, the saying is, prevention is the best cure. So there are certain things we can do to prevent the likelihood of laxity and excitation arising in the first place. So with respect to the body, posture is important, because if the back is bent over, probably dullness. If it's too upright, maybe excitation. The eyes. So again, if we get agitated a lot, close them. If we're falling into dullness, open them. So that can help. Again, as I mentioned just prior, for us in the modern world, one of the main reasons we fall into dullness in meditation, particularly in the morning practice, is we don't get enough sleep. We simply do not get enough quality sleep. So make sure we get enough sleep. Don't cut corners with sleep. Diet is another huge thing in the modern world, particularly sugar. Sugar up, down, up, down, up, down. If we have a lot of sugar in our diet, we're going to get a lot of agitation, a lot of dullness. Exercise the body, because the body is a support for the mind. So some exercise is very helpful. Environmental factors. One of the big reasons for distraction is noise. So try to find a place that's quiet to meditate. If you haven't got that available, if you're a pretty noisy environment, I highly recommend noise cancelling headphones. That can be very, very helpful in those noisy environments. Temperature. If it's too hot, dullness. Too cold, agitation. Adjust temperature. Light. Too much light, maybe agitation. Too dark, dullness. So these are environmental factors we have some control over. Length of session. More is not necessarily better. People want to meditate longer. So the saying here is quality over quantity. No point in doing 1 hour sessions if for most of the time you're just falling into dullness and distraction. Keep the session short. How short? Depend on us as a beginner. We could even start with 10 or 15 minutes, no problems. Always emphasizing quality over quantity. And when we meditate, I highly recommend using a meditation timer like the one we're using here now. It's Insight Timer, this one's called. Because if you don't use a timer, well, one or two things will probably happen. You'll sit down to meditate, and maybe some days you're agitated, you don't really feel like meditating, you try a little bit, and after 5 or 10 minutes, you give up. Giving up in the face of difficulty is not a good habit to get into for anything in our life. If we always give up when things get difficult, we'll never progress in anything we do in our life. If you set a timer, things are difficult, we'll persevere. We'll develop perseverance in the face of difficulty. Very good. Other days, if you don't set a timer, maybe it's going really well and you go, oh, this is really well. I'm enjoying this. What do? We just keep going, and we keep going until when? Till it's not going so well and we stop. And the thing we remember most about meditation is how it ended. So if we're always ending in not a good state, we're going to associate meditation with not very good experiences. We're not going to want to meditate again. If we set a timer, things are going well, then we stop, then we remember that, we'll be enthusiastic to meditate again the following day. Again, enthusiasm. We see with laxity and excitation. If we're not enthusiastic about this practice, we're just going to get caught up in dullness and distraction. So we not only need to reflect on the benefits of this practice, but again, as I mentioned, we need to shift our view of happiness. As long as we're seeing happiness is out there, we're just going to get dull and distracted in all meditation sessions. Shift the view. Understand that the source of happiness lies within our own mind, and this practice is the gateway to that genuine happiness. Also very helpful in our motivation, include others. If we're only doing it for ourselves, if things get difficult, we're more likely to give up. But if we're doing this for the sake of others as well, we're more likely to persevere in the face of difficulties. So that's all I wanted to cover. We'll do a little bit of Q&A now, but I think in the Zoom session, we had some questions from last session that I didn't attend to. So let's go there first. Okay, one question here is, please explain vividness. When I focus on breath, is it the sensations at the nostrils or abdomen becoming clearer? Vividness is another word we use here for clarity, and we can talk about subjective clarity and objective clarity. So their mind is becoming more clear, and therefore the object is becoming more clear, whatever that be, the sensation. So what you will notice is that now that it's not very clear, it's something there, but if clarity improves, you're going to notice more and more clearly the subtle details of that sensation. Like a picture, if we're not very clear, we'll see some sort of outline there, but we can't really notice what it is. But as you're clear, the mind becomes more clear, you'll notice all the very little details in the picture, similarly with the breath or whatever object we use. And then there's another question here, I think. Please explain focusing on awareness as an object. Okay. Technically, this is called shamatha with no object, because awareness is not some object other than awareness. So what we're doing with that is we're turning the awareness inward and just knowing that we're aware. And so that's the object, but it's not anything other than itself. So we often say shamatha with no object. No object means no object other than awareness itself. So we just turn awareness inwards and just know that we're aware. It's so simple, people find it difficult. Because often when I explain this practice, people go, yeah, but what am I supposed to do? Tell me what I got to do. I got to do something. Doing is the problem. Stop doing and just be. Just be present. Just know that you're aware. That's the practice. But more detail maybe next time I present this subject. One more question here. We focus on out-breath to relax tensions. So we are actually focusing on two objects, out-breath and body tension. So remember, we've got two tools here, mindfulness and introspection. So mindfulness is holding the object. But remember, introspection is quality control. And we saw in the definition earlier, introspection's job is not only to monitor the mind, noticing if we dullness or distraction, but monitor the body as well. So we're monitoring the body as well if there's tightness or tension in the body, and then to release that. So what we don't want to do is have too much introspection, because that sort of interferes with mindfulness. We don't want to be introspecting 5 or 10 times a second. But as a beginner, that introspection would need to be fairly active, because if we shut that down for maybe 30 seconds, then 30 seconds we're distracted. But what you will find is that will become less and less necessary the further we go into the practice. So it's a balance, not enough or too much introspection. Okay. Maybe 1 or 2 questions here, then we'll finish for lunch, if there's any questions. Yeah.
Glen, about the tools you mentioned during the slide, one of the things that you mentioned, how we use mindfulness in the modern sense is that
non-judgmental awareness of whatever is going on in the present moment. Yeah, I mean, according to Buddhism, we should be like that as well. But that function we wouldn't call mindfulness. Mindfulness is part of that.
How is it different from watching the mind meditation?
Because in that definition, we allow whatever arises. So in that way of using mindfulness is basically one of the ways we would apply that in daily life. So in daily life, whatever's arising, whatever's coming through our senses and our mind, we don't judge that. We're just aware of that in the present moment. So that would be sort of an aspect of how we would apply mindfulness in daily life. Whereas in shamatha practice, the way we're using mindfulness here, mindfulness is holding a single object. But of course, in daily life, I mean, if we're focusing on a task, we want mindfulness holding on to that task as the object. But if we're just sort of sitting here, then we just become aware of whatever's arising, sensory or mental, and not get caught up in it with reacting and so forth. That's what non-judgmental means. So that's sort of the way it's used in the modern world. Okay, let's break for lunch there. And I think we're coming back at 2 o'clock. So we've got...
Just one query I have.
Yeah.
So while we are sleeping, can we carry on with this practice?
So the question is, while we're sleeping, can we carry on with this practice? If we can do lucid dreaming and lucid sleep, absolutely. If we're not lucid, then it's unconscious. So it would be difficult to do this practice. But we find that particularly in the Tantra level of practice in Tibetan Buddhism, some emphasis is put into what's called dream yoga and sleep yoga. Mm-hmm. So, and there are a number of reasons for that. There's a lot of parallels between dreaming and sleeping with the dying process and so forth. But yes, I mean, if we could do lucid dreaming, for example, then when we're in the dream, we go, okay, I'm going to do some shamatha practice now. So we could do that. And if we could do lucid sleep, we could do that as well. If we're lucidly aware that we're in deep dreamless sleep, we could use that to just rest in that awareness and do shamatha practice, but that's a little bit more difficult. It's possible.
But then just on this, because this was a question I was thinking of asking later, very often I do shamatha at night and in the shavasana
Posture.
position. I find that I've started remembering my dreams. So I don't know whether, I mean, it's not exactly disturbing. It's not exactly peaceful, because I'm finding that, I'm remembering too much.
Yeah. So the question is, she's doing shamatha in the evening in the shavasana posture, and due to that, she's now remembering her dreams more. But whether that's a good thing or not is not so sure. And that's true, because with shamatha practice, particularly in shavasana posture, we're becoming more aware in a very relaxed state. So you actually may find, and this is a way what we can do as well, is that doing the shavasana posture in the evening, shamatha practice, you could, if you're developing well, you could maintain awareness of the whole falling asleep process, maintain awareness in deep sleep and in dreaming. So you can maintain awareness 24/7. And so that's certainly possible. And yes, we probably will remember more dreams. But again, the thing with dreams is, and there's a lot of theories about how to interpret dreams, but they're just dreams, and particularly not to get caught up in them. Often we have sort of bad dreams or whatever. We think, oh, something bad's going to happen. But what we find is in Tibetan Buddhism, in certain practices, like, for example, purification practices, like Vajrasattva practice, purification, they say a sign that it's actually working is you have these dreams of all this black stuff coming out of your body and all these horrible things. So it's not necessarily a nightmare. It's actually the fact that we're cleansing our body and mind of negativities. So I think it can be a good thing, remembering dreams, but they're not to get caught up in them, and they're just dreams. They're not like some omen that something bad's going to happen to you or something like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about what's occurring in dreams. In fact, dreams can give you maybe a little bit more insight into your own character, and then you got that to work with. So it's usually a good thing. Okay, let's stop there. We've run over time. Let's break for lunch. Come back at 2:00.
So on behalf of Tushita, Glen, I'd like to